Sure.
So hello, and thank you for being here for our summer 2022 exhibition, Art Talk. We are joined by Robert Goldman, who is a New York-based artist known for his vibrant portraits using metallic silver paint, and who has exhibited in many galleries and museums internationally. Thanks for being here, Bobby. Also with us is artist John Martini. He's a sculptor and printmaker who splits his time between Key West and France, where he is now. And his work is also widely represented, within public and private collections. Joining us as well is Carol Munder, who is also in France and, moves between Key West and France as well. And she is a photographer and lithographer who has received numerous awards for her work. And really excited to hear about your process a little bit more, Carol. Also with us is artist Shiri Mordechay, who's a New York-based artist on the rise, I'd say. She was born in Israel and raised in Nigeria. And Shiri came to the States to study at the School of Visual Arts and has since been exhibiting her work also internationally. And finally, with us is Joey Tepedino, who is a new artist as well, self-taught and based in Pennsylvania, who first started exhibiting with us last summer. So this is, super fun to have you in another one of our shows. So yeah, thanks for being here, guys. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Yeah.
So far.
Yes.
And originally, I was going to keep everyone muted, all of our guests, but now you have the opportunity to unmute yourselves since there's only a few of us. If you have a question at any point in time, you can, raise your hand, jump in, say, hey, I got a question, and feel free to ask it. Or you can put it in the chat and we can get to it later on in our program towards the end when we do a little bit of a Q&A, up to you. But, let's start by focusing on works that are currently in our exhibition. So I'm going to share my screen with everyone and have each of our artists kind of go through their works that are included in the current exhibition. So let's do that. And first up is Bobby. And Bobby G's work, when we first we're considering works for the exhibition, he came to us with these 3 pieces and has quite a story behind them. Bobby, if you want to take the reins and let us know what you were thinking when you were making these.
Well, thank you. I have developed organically a painting language, or a language through painting, with the drawing being metallic paint and the paint itself very fluid with a kind of a non-Euclidean geometry. And embedded in the paint are these very simply drawn faces. Mostly they come from things I see on the street or anywhere. Online, Instagram, in a museum, in a gallery. If there's a face that's simply rendered, it's a useful reference to me. I have I think it's close to 1,200 faces in an album on my photo app on my phone. So the context of these 3 paintings is that I was in Chicago for a wedding, my daughter's wedding, on March the 9th, scheduled for a 1-month trip to California, where I'm originally from. I was going to visit all my cousins from Sonoma County down to Palm Springs, Huntington Beach, the San Fernando Valley, Oakland, California, all my cousins, all through kind of a California road trip I was going to take. So after the wedding, which was beautiful, I was in a real exalted mood. I was sitting in this hotel room late at night, scheduled to fly to Oakland the very next morning early with the news of the pandemic just hitting. And I was there uncertain, it was in the state of uncertainty about whether I should go, cancel the trip. I had a big oversized wheelie with, I had warm weather clothes, cold weather clothes. I was in Chicago, and what to do was really a big decision. One of my cousins is a doctor, actually, and later he told me I did make the right decision. Even though the airline screwed me, I decided I better just fly back to New York and, you know, start dealing with the coming uncertainty of the pandemic. So instead of being in California, I found myself back at my studio, and it was just this very certain moment, you know, it was just right now. Everything was so uncertain that I felt bewildered. I really did. And then a couple of days later, or maybe a day later, after I made this first painting on the left, I made the same image again. Both are from the street. Things, image of graffiti I saw on the street. I made it, I rarely do this, but I did it. I made the same painting again, and I felt, instead of bewildered, worried. And then I just gave up. By the middle painting, I was just freaked. And that was really the kind of the psychological state that I found myself in. I'm lucky I had the paintings to kind of express it in. And I was wondering, you know, this image, which is very loosely rendered, you know, with molten metal. It's actually metallic paint. It's, you know, it's my interpretation, really, because the drawing is not very precise. You can't, there's just a limit to how much you can control this stuff. And so it's an interpretation of a drawing I saw on the street. And I was wondering who put that there on the street and what was their psychological state of mind. I was just thinking that today. Interaction. If you're going to make a portrait or even a drawing of a drawing, there's an interaction between the source and the interpreter, the artist, putting it in this kind of context. It's about painting. I've always been to see myself as one of the painters, and I'm still doing it. Thank you.
Yeah, so you're talking about how, you know, you had this very extreme reaction to the news of the pandemic, and that kind of came out in these works. But I wanted to ask how you see these works as differing from works before the pandemic hit, in terms of your practice, or in terms of, you know, how you made them, or, you know, what you were thinking.
Not much different, except that at that moment, what I said before, there's some kind of transposition between the, say, if you're making a portrait, the motif or the subject and the artist. And so I was injecting some kind of psychological confusion that I was in at the moment I made them.
Right. Very cool. And you use this metallic paint, and you've kind of used it throughout your artistic career. But when did you start using metallic paint, and how did you come about that, you know?
Actually, the first time I started using the silver paint was when I was in my next to last year at art school. And I was emulating the New York painters at the time. That was in the early mid 70s. I was looking really at Bryce Martin, Jake Berteau. This is what painting was at that time. You know, there were others, Malcolm Morley, and I was aware of. And I made these kind of very simplified, sort of minimalist, abstract paintings with muted color and silver paint. And I just thought of it as a New York material. It was Andy Warhol's silver factory, you know, it was Jackson Pollock who was flicking threads of it throughout his, you know, paintings. and it was just a natural thing. It was part of the context I saw myself in. It was I was a New York painter.
Yeah, totally. Um, and, since the pandemic started, you have these very, I would say, expressive faces and these expressive portraits. And you kind of, as you can see with the one behind me, you kind of kept on with that like floating figurative head. But where do you see your artwork going? Are you going to continue on with this kind of theme of, I guess, facial expressions and portraits, or are you going elsewhere? What does the future hold, I guess?
These three paintings are in the middle of what I've been working on for 4 or 5 years.
Okay,
They're
cool.
all paintings of faces, all pretty much the same size. And I have, I don't know, 150, 160 of them. I figure I could fill up a big space with a cast of characters, and you would have to create the narrative yourself. And, as I describe these, what I realize is that somebody just coming upon them without knowing, the when and how they were made and what they were doing, wouldn't have that association at all. I don't know what people would make of them without, when they just come upon them, which is how they should be encountered anyway.
Right. Yeah, just fully as they are. I think the emotion is very tangible within them, though. I mean, even seeing them without the context, it's you're kind of hit by the expressiveness of it.
These are three. This is unusual in that there are three together. But I want to make a painting where there's actually a lot going on. Something really, an activated space to look at. If I can make the paint dance.
I think you've been successful for the most part at that. Well, thank you, Bobby. I think we're going to move on to our next artist, but we'll definitely come back and talk more to you a little bit later. Here, so moving right along. Next up is is John Martini, whose monoprints are very dynamic and interesting. But John, I wanted to ask you, what is your process like? Because you're also a sculptor. So it might be interesting to know, how your monoprints kind of relate to your sculptural works as well.
Well, I do this. The sculpture work is I try. Most of my work is I strive for an intuitive kind of work. The sculpture being made out of hard steel materials.
Right.
Once they begin, they're pretty much done. They come from a sketch and they're just roughly scaled up, but there's not a lot of room for playing with them. In the sketching there is, and I try to make the sketches as intuitive as possible. I spent a lot of time sketching just simple ink sketches, and seeing where from one sketch to another where it leads me, and then finally I'll pick out one and I'll make a sculpture from it. However, the monoprints, which I discovered I don't know, about 20 years ago, they're incredibly immediate. They're of the moment. They're very fast. They're very intuitive, and they're full of surprises. I mean, that's the thing about monoprints is that I work with ink. I lay down ink on a copper plate. I put the paper on. I run it through the press, and I'm anxious to see what's going to come because I don't know. It's a surprise. And sometimes, as with many artists, I think the surprise is a good surprise. Other time, it's not such a good surprise.
Right.
But they do relate to the sculpture in a sort of an emotional sense in their relationship to the world. But technically, they're far more immediate, medium to work in.
Right. So you say they're, in terms of how they relate to the world, I'm wondering, do your works reflect the way that you see the world, or is it kind of vice versa? The world is, projecting something onto you.
That's an interesting question. I think that we're all collectors, uh, emotionally and psychologically, that we're constantly harvesting the world around us. And I feel
Mhm.
like my job is to take what I've harvested and to put it back out in a palatable form, in a form that maybe someone will understand my understanding of what's coming, of what's coming.
That's
So,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
interesting when we look at this piece specifically, because for me, there's a very clear Adam and Eve reference. Um,
uh-huh.
but is that intentional? I mean, in other works in the show too, there's a very like spiritual kind of religious connotation to a lot of them. Is that, yeah, is that intentional, or is that something
Well,
that?
I think, actually I was raised in the Catholic Church. I'm not particularly affiliated anymore, which is an incredibly rich source of imagery and
Right.
story, and it never goes away. I mean,
Oh,
it's there, right? As much as I would like to exercise it sometime, I
mhm.
don't. And also, I'm not. I studied sociology in university. It wasn't. I came to art later, and part of my arts education has been spending lots and lots of time in museums, and
Mhm.
and drawing in museums, and bringing in influences from museums. So I
Yeah.
think that there is a spiritual aspect. I think there's a political aspect. I think there's a sociological aspect. There's a narrative. I think my work is often narrative, or I imagine it is. Um,
Mhm.
but it's like I said, the monoprints. I I've got one room where I work, where I do the monoprints, and they just kind of spin out, and I try to be almost blank
Right.
uh,
And
when
do you
I do it.
ever repeat, a figure, or, try it in a slightly different way? Or is it strictly like, I understand monoprint is one print, but
Right.
do you ever recycle imagery, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I've got a set of I've got a kind of a set of characters or interlocking uh, themes that come together. But in terms of technically, normally I use a plate two or up to three times maximum.
Oh,
So I
awesome.
work with a shadow image. So I'll have like that the last piece that we just saw, that
Mhm.
was maybe the second pull um,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
on the plate. So what you're left when you run through the press, you have your work on paper, and then you have a shadow image, which is the reverse image, and then I work with that. I mean, they're not at all. They're related in a general sense, but they're
Mhm.
not at all. They don't particularly match one from the other.
I see. And you also mentioned briefly about your unconventional path into making art. Would you mind expanding on that journey a little bit more, and yeah, telling us how you got to where you are today?
I'm not sure where I am today, other than France. I'm kind of I grew up in the '60s, and I was quite involved. I was a political person. It was a time of a lot of political upheaval and political energy, and I spent several years as an organizer. And then when I realized that I really wasn't going to change things were not going to change,
Mhm.
that perhaps I could point out the contradictions I was seeing in art. That's a long time ago, but that got me started. In terms of technically, I started out just as kind of a hobbyist,
Mhm.
making jewelry, designing jewelry, which then led to the sculpture, which then led to me expanding my education personally,
Right.
and just and also not having gone to art school, it was maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. But I've really deep dived into artist biographies. I'm trying to figure it out,
Oh,
and
cool.
I find that um, reading biographies of artists has allowed me to begin to understand what that process is about a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. And
What
last
I-
question for
Go
you
ahead.
now is, do you regret not going to art school? And if not, how do you think it's helped you, not participating in that academic, art world?
Well, I think that one disadvantage of not going to art school is that you don't make actual contacts.
Mm-hmm.
That the contacts you make in art school, which is not about art necessarily, but is about career.
Right.
It's a very important thing. I owned an art gallery for quite a few years, and part of the people I represented were outsider artists, and a very strong relationship with the Southern outsider artists. And twice a year for many years, I'd travel all around the South and meet with them and deal their work. And I've got an incredible amount of respect for them because they're making art that's truly from inside themselves. They're making art because they have to make art.
Mhm.
Mostly they were factory workers or farmers or something. So I've managed, and every year it's a surprise. I mean, well, of course I had every kind of job in the world,
Uh-huh.
through the early part of my career, from taxi driver to, anything you can imagine. But I've managed to eke out a living every year. It's kind of a surprise. And I've had a reasonably good run of things. And I'm lucky and happy with that. And so, no, I wouldn't trade my
Mhm.
path for another path. I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot more in that path that you're not revealing quite yet. But we're going to keep it moving, and maybe I'll come back and ask you more questions later.
Sure.
Katie, before we leave John, it would be great to see just a few more images. And I wanted to ask John a question about one of them. Well, I just thought it was an interesting piece to ask about where that face came from.
You would,
Because
good.
I mean, talking about, Bobby had a lot of good comments about where his faces came from. So
it came from the deep the deep well inside. I honestly have no answer for that. It's just one of those things that that in a long evening of making prints, it just popped up. Sometimes I think these things just they just pop up. I don't always make decisions, and it's an unusual one for me, and it looks like it refers to some sort of mythical, one way or the other, mythical character. But really, frankly, how I'm not very good at explaining where these things come from, and rarely do I. I prefer to let people put their own reference on it. So rarely do I explain, even if I know what the explanation is. But in this case, I don't really have one.
right. Well, that brings to mind one of my favorite quotes from a Russian artist, Natalia Nestorova, who said to a reporter who was asking her, "What is your work about? Tell us what we're looking at." And she said, "My work is about what you see."
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great answer. So,
and that's pretty much the way I so rarely, like I said, even if I know what it's about, try to describe it, because I think everyone brings brings their story to it, and comes away with their story. So yeah. I wish I had an answer. But that's it.
All right. Well, great. Our next artist is Carol, who has a really interesting process that I would love for you to kind of explain a little bit, and how you got to these very haunting, a little bit grainy images that you make.
Okay, my process, you said lithography. The process is called photogravure.
Right.
And it's a 19th century process where you take an image. It doesn't necessarily have to be a photograph. It's pretty traditionally photographs. You take a photograph and it's transferred to a copper plate. You etch the copper plate and then put it through a gravure press. It's a long process. I do it traditionally. I don't, there's no computers involved, so it's film, and the resist for it is gelatin tissue. So it's a pretty traditional, slow method of making an image. I've been using a Diana camera for 40 years, or maybe 40 years, at least 35 years. And
will you explain what that is?
Say that again?
Will you explain what kind of camera that is?
Oh, a Diana. A Diana camera was a camera that was first manufactured in Hong Kong as a toy. And back in the early 70s, I don't know what, in a graduate student program in Ohio or something, a teacher bought these cameras, issued them to the students. And it was to kind of get, it was that era of 35 millimeter photography just blossoming. And everybody, if you went to photo school, you had fisheye lenses, you had 12 lenses and 3 bodies always attached to yourself. This was a simple plastic camera. You had sunny skies, partly sunny skies, and shadows to adjust for aperture setting. It took 120 roll film. And it kind of took off. It's a little bit of it's a pretty well-known camera. It's sort of a cult camera, I would say.
Very cool.
It went out of production for years, and you had to find them at flea markets. And then a company reissued it, Lomography or something like that, and you can now buy them new. So its redeeming factor is it has a plastic lens. And so that lens has to be in focus, but it's never really in focus.
And so that's kind of what helps to create this grainy feeling in the image.
Yeah, you know, I grabbed a hold of it years ago because it sort of felt like it could lend something that I wanted to somehow show or say. I mean, I don't use any other camera. That's it.
Wow. And, you know, looking at this composition, it's very interesting, but how do you decide, you know, what's going to be within the frame? And you have different, it's like little setups, if I'm wrong. So are these are like figurines as well, right?
So it's evolved, and these bodies of work are sort of the last of an evolution. John and I have been collecting wooden sculptures at brocantes, which are the equivalent of a flea market. They're just these soulful creatures that, why did somebody carve them? Mostly they're anonymous. That first one is African. I went from photographing vessels. I wanted to sort of be Morandi at one point. I sort of came to the end of that period and started photographing these wooden sculptures for something to do. And it evolved. I originally didn't really want to be setting up scenes, but it's evolved till I'm setting up scenes. I sort of don't control what I do in a lot of ways. So I have these sculptures that I photograph, and they eventually it evolved to they needed background. And this image here is 2 different photographs.
Oh, really?
This dog and the man is in one photograph. And the background is not, it was, again, I found it in a flea market, sort of a cardboard constructed house.
Right.
That was it wasn't a doll house. It was more, you know, it was, I don't know if it was an architect's project for school, because it had been rain washed. It was kind of in bad shape. But so that's 2 images. I oftentimes lately have been montaging 2 pieces of film.
Right. So that's interesting. So as you kind of were saying, as you progressed, you know, through using this camera and these figures, you wanted to start adding more and more. Is it just a feeling that makes you go towards that, or is there something that kind of drove you there specifically? Or
I think that as you go, for myself as an artist, I don't change drastically. It's sort of with each body of work,
okay,
something evolves, and you have to. I don't know. You know, I find these objects and I have to do something with them.
yeah, yeah. But there's no like thematic, I guess. There's no story that you're trying to tell.
Well, there's no thematic. Let's see.
Program that
I did make in 2019. I did do a handmade book.
Oh, cool.
And it was sort of one of those projects. It started out, it was going to be a 3-page book. I was going to stitch it together and be done and move on with the work that I was going to do for that year. And it sort of took over. And it took me because each folio, each page was hand done.
Wow.
Text was hand done, you know, it was quite a nightmare in doing, you know, and the process. But I loved the piece. And the book was called My Imaginary Friends. So there wasn't a big story involved. It was pretty much introduced. It was these lovely characters, and I had to use words to make things connect. So there was no story, but there was sort of a theme that went on.
Yeah, right.
And from that, I want to do another one. And these images, I think will be involved in another book.
Oh, very cool.
How, I don't know. The first one sort of came about as a book. As I was working with the film and working with the images, the words actually came with it. The second book will be very different.
In what ways? No words?
No, I think I'll have to have words to tie it together. How? The other one just came together. Literally when I was here in France, so you have to work with film. So the first stage is a film positive that you make. So I just made up these film positives and made the book as I was going along. And I would have images and I would need something to go with it. And I would like search around either in past negatives or stuff that was in the studio. And so I worked with the film and then went back to the States and actually made the plates.
Yeah.
So these, and that was, I had nothing to show but 3 little tiny 6x6 books for an entire year of my life. So I felt like this time around I would make photogravures for the wall, or I would make an individual plate. When you make a book, you know, you have to, on the plate, another image will sit beside it that doesn't even relate to the image. So these, I'm just making images, and this year I'm hoping to sort of suss things over and figure out how they can interrelate to each other.
Well, that sounds very exciting. I'm looking forward to asking more questions about that moving forward, but let's move on to, and thank you, let's move on to Shiri's work. And Shiri does these wonderful watercolors, but I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about your process and, you know, what inspires you to make these fantastical scenes.
Oh, hi everyone. So I kind of, the way, so there are ink and watercolors on paper, and some of my other work is 3-dimensional. I cut the paintings and then I paste them and I build worlds, but it's also sort of the same concept on a flat piece. Is they're almost fragmented pieces and they're creating a whole. So the way I do them, I actually don't think too much about what I do. I sort of just show up. I tell myself, just show up with your body and just, you know, start to paint, start to create imagery without even thinking and knowing what it, like, it's almost very blank. So I make these images, and the images themselves communicate and tell you what needs to come around it. So I guess it is just like a very universal creative process, because what I hear when I'm hearing everybody else talk about their work, it totally relates. So I also think of it a little bit like shamanic, like being a shaman, because I'm putting these images and the images tell me what they're creating themselves with me. And so so I kind of like, it's like I'm here with I'm split inside and I'm here with my body, but my mind is completely somewhere else. I'm not really that aware of where it is. It could be full of anxieties, and the anxieties take you somewhere else. But as long as I hear with my body and I start to make and paint these images, something starts to form. But these pieces require time because there is so much detail. So I tell myself, I just need the time.
Mhm.
And I know it sounds a little bit mechanical, but time reveals everything. And then time makes me zoom out of it and see what is happening and so I come in and out of the pieces, like
Right.
very close to it and then pulling out and then seeing parts of the whole and then zooming in. So that kind of process. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like, a long one. And like you said, something, and as everyone's kind of said, it's not, there's no real, like, I'm going to paint this or I'm going to make this specifically. But, working that way, how do you know when something's finished then? If you're not, I guess, controlling
Yes.
the scene in a way.
It's true. I mean, I have this like hate relationship with things. I'm very critical. So when the criticism is so painful, then it's kind of, I cannot leave it this way. So the criticism starts to be okay. Or when there is a spiritual feeling that reveals itself, or I'm meeting with God, or some
Right.
kind of divine feeling or spiritual experience, but that doesn't happen very often. But there's always a goal to get to that point.
Mhm. So there's this feeling that when you look at a work, like, oh, it's done, or oh no, it's not done, and here's what's wrong with it. Is that
Yes,
correct?
it's never done, especially I think the way I want to make things, but I detach myself from it, and I think about the next thing, and the whatever is not, whatever that hunger spills into the next thing, and that's what makes me want to make another piece and another piece. I did once work on a piece for 3 years because it was really huge, and yeah, so three-dimensional world that you could walk into. So that was a 3-year.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That sounds awesome. And we have this really nice close-up of your work. And I was wondering if, all these figures in here, there's some things that are recognizable and others that are really not recognizable at all, like seem like they're from your imagination. But do you ever work from photographs when you're painting, or is it all stemming from your head?
So I do work from photos, but the photos are just a starting point. They are not, they're just a way for me to have information about what reality looks like, or how light hits objects, and how a face or the photo can stimulate something in my mind, so for me to enter the psychological world inside a photo. But I am not, the photo is just the starting point. For instance, what you're looking at, that piece with a seashell, is I had the seashell on my table. So I began the piece by just putting that seashell on the table. So it's like, same with photos, it's a grounding point, and then it changes and morphs. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. And I'll show you the next one too. Now this one is like chock full of references in my mind, with the Mickey Mouse balloons. But do you have like a story or a narrative that comes to mind when you look at this, Shiri?
Okay, so I stare at the piece and it's talking to me. It's not really talking to me from I'm not interested in knowing about the story, because the minute I know what it's about, I lost it. So I think that I like the places of dilemma a little bit. So when I look at it, it's almost like when you enter a dream, and in your dreams you feel things from a different communication level. It could be, it's not necessarily conscious of what things are about, but it's an experiential aspect. So I think that I'm looking for the experience. I'm creating an event. And of course, the world can interpret it how it wants to, but for me, it communicates to me for another brain, that another part of the brain. It could be the brain in my stomach, or my yeah.
Well, that's perfect for our exhibition. This is kind of an open question for everyone, and maybe we'll get to a little bit later. But one of the things that I was thinking about is we've placed all your work within this context of like the dream sphere, the unconscious made manifest, physically, figuratively. But I wondered, and maybe we can answer this later, but I wondered, how you as the artist saw your work within that framing, and if it was right in your mind, or if you don't know if your work really fits into that. But Shiri, it seems like your work would fit into that context.
Yes, and hearing everybody else talk about their work and see their work, I just feel like they were saying, like, I don't even have these words to talk about and to even say, oh, this is what I'm doing. But I feel like whatever everybody talked about so far is what I'm doing. Yeah. And some of it, at least. Yeah.
I'm glad you guys connect on that matter, which that's a good thing, I think, in my mind. And you're very detail oriented here, Shiri. And, I just wondered, like, how long would this take you? You said a project once took you 3 years, but, a single watercolor. What's your modus operandi, I guess?
I mean, I'm kind of detached and like divorced from the time. I wish I could tell you.
You're in a whole other world then.
Yes. Or I'm not here to know that. What can I, or don't want.
Right, yeah. Totally. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with us about your works?
Yeah, I mean, not really, but I can just say that when I make them, I think I pretty much said everything that there's a lot of anxieties happening inside of me, and a lot of confusion and a lot of battle, and then making them detailed and concentrated. It's also controlling the energy that's happening in here, and it's controlling them.
Yeah.
But at the same
time, help you work through it, I guess? Does painting help you work through those problems, or does it only exaggerate them?
It's just a survival thing, honestly. I mean, it's like I don't know if I want to be helped so much necessarily. I mean, it is what it is,
Yeah.
Whatever is. Yeah.
I see. Well, very cool. Thanks, Shiri.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to Joey's work now. And Joey is, John, you were talking about outsider art earlier, and Joey is someone that I'd consider an outsider artist, given the fact that he also did not go to art school. And correct me if I'm wrong, Joey, you just started making artworks around the pandemic. Is that correct? Or
no,
how did you get into art, I guess?
Oh, I've been making art for years. I just started showing people like around 2020, I guess.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So it's always been a part of your life, but you've never had classes or anything like that?
No, I've been, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I've just been like ever since I was a kid, I've been drawing. Like I would draw connecting faces, like literally my whole life. I can't remember a time I would never do that. Like I draw on tables, on desks, on pieces of paper. Then I would get jobs at factories and warehouses, and I would draw the same things like on pieces of paper and put them in the boxes and like send them off. And like, I thought that was funny because people would get water heaters and toilets, and then my drawings would be in there. And I don't know, I slowly started painting on like small canvases. And I remember I would put them on like in people's mailboxes and on their driveways. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but yeah. So then I started getting into larger canvases, and I would do the same thing. I would just paint and draw on them, and then I'd start putting like emotion into it. As weird as that sounds, like however I was feeling that day. Like I would just leave it setting on the living room floor, and I would come home from work and I'd paint a little bit, and I would just however I felt that day. If I was angry, if I was happy, and then it slowly would just form into this thing.
Right. And you've described your work before as, kind of a manifestation of your internal, anxieties, like you're saying, your emotions. And would you mind like walking us through like your process in a sense of, how you get to this final image here? Because you say you draw a bunch of faces everywhere, but you clearly have quite a sense for color. And so, is it, do you choose colors based on your emotion, or is it just what feels right in the moment, like everyone's kind of saying?
Yeah, I feel like I'll ruin it, but yeah, it's just whatever I'm feeling in the moment. I just grab something, I paint it. Sometimes it doesn't work, so I'll paint over it, and there's no like explanation. There's no deep explanation that I have to. I don't know.
And so
everybody's artwork was incredible. I just wanted to say that.
And you said you started small. Are you thinking you're going to continue to make larger and larger works, or where do you see your artwork going in the next year or so?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to do larger works. The larger, the better. That's what I've learned. These are some of the larger pieces that I've done, but I'd like to do even bigger.
Right. And you say you've been making these works since you were quite young. So I'm wondering, has your kind of aesthetic look changed at all as you've, started making these larger works, or, started showing at galleries, like that kind of thing? Or is it been a lot of the same imagery? Are you kind of using symbols that you used for a long time in your pieces?
Yeah, once people started paying attention to it, I think I changed it a little bit, because not even like consciously. I just like, I tried to be a little neater, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And I hate to even admit that, because like, I don't know, like my earlier stuff, I'd just like get angry, and like, just like the one that you're showing right now, there'd be like paint all over it. Like you wouldn't even really be able to see the face. It would just be a big mess. And I loved it. I thought it was great, but like, I kind of try to refrain from doing that as much and ruining it.
So you think, is it because it's more commercial, more marketable if it's a little bit neater, or what's your rationale behind
I guess
that?
it looks better like that. It definitely would, because what I would do is I would make them, I'd paint them, and I moved around a lot. So I would just leave the paintings at the last place that I'd hide them in the wall, like behind furnaces and boilers, and I would just leave them there.
No way.
Yeah, so I never really cared.
Would you sign them, or would they just be anonymously left everywhere you went?
Anonymously left, so I don't know what happened with them.
That's so interesting. When you get famous, you're going to have all of these like fake Joey Tepedino works that pop up, but really you just hid them in random buildings.
Yep.
Well, fantastic. Is there anything else you wanted to say to your work, or speak to your work at all, Joey? If not, that's totally cool too.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, cool. So I think I'm going to stop sharing now and open up the floor to everyone to ask questions if you have any, or, artists on artists, if you guys want to talk to each other about your practice, that would also be very interesting for me. Any questions? Feel free to ask if you have them.
Well, I'll just add that it seems like that the curator, obviously, there's a thread that runs through all of that discussion. So, whether that was a conscious, whether that was a conscious decision, or whether that's just how it happens, but it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm surprised, like I was saying earlier, I'm surprised at how connected all of your works have become, despite being, I think, visually quite different in a lot of ways. But, like you're saying, John, there's a similar thread throughout all of them, which is super cool. But what I wanted to get back to was that question of, do you feel like the way that we framed your work in the show as being kind of like this dream state, kind of a manifestation of the unconscious a little bit. Is that accurate? And if not, you know, like, please correct us. I'm just curious.
Are you speaking to me?
I'm speaking to everyone.
Everybody, yeah. Yeah, I think that in the conversation, it became clear that is an aspect of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and also I was interested in Shiri's point about time and unconscious. That I think for an artist, at least for me, there's moments when you lose contact with the kind of the material world,
Mm-hmm.
and that those are always what make it all work. I mean, that's the gift, is to lose consciousness, not bodily consciousness, but to enter some other realm of consciousness where all of the constraints and parameters disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just in some fugue state. You know, for me, that's like that's the payback. You know, and that's when things open up.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because I've heard artists say that they try and consciously, or like they try and put themselves in an altered state, you know, before they begin making work, to make the best work, I guess. But from what you're saying, it seems like you start making work and you fall into this, you know, state of where time doesn't really exist, and you're kind of in this blissful unawareness, I guess.
Yeah, for me, work comes only out of work. You know, if I haven't worked for a long time, I have to go to the studio and sweep the floor.
I see.
Nothing comes without, nothing comes. I mean, for me, work creates work, and then work creates the state. But everybody, I'm sure, is different about you know, whether that exists or whether I imagine that.
Right, definitely. Anyone else want to share how they get there? Bobby,
I just want to say,
from-
Katie, that I think, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, in relation to that, my photogravure is very much a process.
Right.
I photograph, then I start working with the film, and there's just lots and lots and lots of processes.
Mm-hmm.
And you get lost in that, or I get lost in that, and I don't think my anxieties go away. I don't think about what's outside that dark room door or the press room. But it's through that process that you just work, and everything is left behind other than what's in front of me.
Mm-hmm. And so that those anxieties, those thoughts that are on your mind kind of get imbued into your works, you think? Or
no, I don't. They just left behind.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
It's very much a process, you know.
Right.
There's lots of chemistry, there's lots of just doing things.
Mm-hmm.
It saves me.
Right, yeah.
But each of you has, in a very, to me, a very similar way, talked about how you create work and how the work basically creates itself. That you aren't bringing to the table a preconceived idea that's going to be created. And that's not to say that other artists don't do that, but I think in this show, the link that John was mentioning is very much that you all come to your work with the idea that the work will basically create itself through the process of your working on it, that the ideas and the images will come from your life and they'll just appear. You're not basically focused on a dogmatic approach of this is what I'm going to create.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the link that is really magical about all the work in this show.
Yeah.
Well, and kudos to the curators for recognizing that and putting that together. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so one
Great
last
to see you all.
Yeah, one last call for questions or final words or anything anyone wants to leave us with.
I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for furthering my interest in all the works that I've seen today. And based on all the conversation, one of my favorite quotes these days that I came across many years ago was that process saves me from the poverty of my intentions. And I've always kind of liked that. And tried my best to adhere to it in my own studio, but I think everybody touched on that. Those pieces of little crumpled tinfoils of thoughts and process and intentions, all kind of touching edges as you guys go through what you're doing. But I thank you very much, and thank the gallery and Hal for inviting us to this forum. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for talking, and thank you, Michael. That was very well said. If we have nothing else to say, I just want to say thank you again for joining us. And a recording of this talk is going to be edited and uploaded to the gallery's website and YouTube channel. And we will make it accessible for you guys to share with your friends, your family, anyone. Yeah, but other than that, thanks so much for coming, everyone, and agreeing to participate. It was awesome.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.